Very interesting article here by Alan McLeod at Mint Press News about some of the corporate interests, particularly pro-Israeli PACs that are lining up behind one of Ilhan Omar's challengers. So backed by millions from pro-Israel interests, Anton Melton Meaux, I'm going to say Meaux, takes aim at Ilhan Omar. And this dude seems more or less like a Pete Buttigieg type character, just with his policies and his rhetoric. Some of the most committed pro-Israel and anti-Palestinian groups are flooding the Democratic primaries in an attempt to unseat Representative Ilhan Omar. On the surface, there are 5 Democratic candidates vying to be the congressional representative for Minnesota's 5th District. But in reality, it's a 2-horse race with 2 candidates raising millions, mostly from out of state, in this unusually hotly contested primary. One's presence is perfectly understandable. In 2 short years, Ilhan Omar has risen to be a highly visible and controversial progressive champion. According to polls, she is more known to the American public than prominent Democrats like New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, Hillary Clinton's running mate Tim Kaine, and presidential candidate Andrew Yang. The other is more surprising. Anton Melton Meaux, a lawyer by trade and a political neophyte, has been the unlikely recipient of millions of campaign dollars. If you live in Minneapolis and turn on the television or radio, you will very likely hear a well-produced ad extolling Melton Meaux or criticizing Omar. The challenger has raised over $4 million in his quest to unseat the Somali-born politician, a huge sum for a congressional primary. And while Omar has now closed the funding gap, the monies come from very different sources. The majority of Omar's funds come from small donations. Kind of important, right? You want to be funded for the people. Otherwise, if you're taking these large corporate PAC donations, you're going to be beholden to those corporate interests, to those PAC interests. Has received huge sums from pro-Israel groups and from wealthy individuals eager to see Omar unseated. The #1 zip code for donations to his campaign is in Beverly Hills, California. And according to Ken Martin, chairman of the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, his average donation to Democratic fundraising websites ActBlue is $6.50. Omar's is $18. If you can't tell, I mean, Omar's campaign is supported by, working class constituents. People have wanted to donate to her campaign, inside and outside of Minnesota, while Melton Meaux is bankrolled by these corporate interests, in particular these pro-Israel interests and PACs. Much of his money comes from pro-Israel PACs, like I just said. American PAC, for instance, has given around $382,000, pretty big sum, right? Strongly conservative group NORPAC raised over $100,000 from Melton Meaux in fundraisers in May and June, with APAC generating 3 times the amount for him. Together, we have the privilege of accomplishing a dual objective: supporting a deserving candidate, Anton Melton Meaux, who has committed a genuine desire to strengthen the U.S.-Israeli relationship and bring honor to his country and the party, at the same time replacing Ilhan Omar, a highly divisive member of Congress who has proven to be unfairly and repeatedly critical of Israel. Again, nothing that Ilhan Omar has said with regards to Israel has been unfair or overtly critical. She is just calling out the hypocrisy of the U.S. government supporting Israel with no strings attached, while the Israeli government, continues, the apartheid state that exists, the horrible treatment of the Palestinians, and it's not overtly critical or unfair. It's calling a spade a spade. It's calling out injustice when it happens, and we should hold up politicians like Ilhan Omar and and support them when they do like that, and not cower to the Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C. or otherwise. Ilhan Omar has been a vocal critic of Israel and a supporter of the BDS movement against it. One of the only Muslims in Congress, she has also criticized the $3.8 billion in yearly aid the U.S. gives Israel. Pretty big chunk of money, right? Given how they dehumanize the Palestinians day after day. Arguing that Washington should be leveraging the aid to stop the illegal settlements and ensure full rights for Palestinians. Seems pretty reasonable, right? We're going to give the government of Israel almost $4 billion a year in aid. They should probably stop the illegal settlements and ensure the full rights of Palestinians. That just seems like no-brainer, right? Quote, we must end the occupation of Palestine, she said. Last year, the Netanyahu government denied her entry into Israel or Palestine, where she was to meet with members of the Knesset and the United Nations. Pro-Israel critics have constantly described her criticism of the state as anti-Semitic, which, you know, a lot of people will use that type of rhetoric when you call out the horrible treatment of the Palestinian people by the Israeli government. They'll call that anti-Semitic as a way of deflecting from any of the legitimate criticism, like people like Ilhan Omar and others will levy against Israel. That's not anti-Semitic. It's calling out the injustice that is being perpetrated by the Israeli government with the aid and support of the U.S. towards Palestinian people. I mean, again, illegal settlements and ensuring full rights of Palestinians. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. That is just ridiculous to make that claim. Meaux himself has been rather vague with his campaign, running primarily on a message of unity and being an alternative to Omar. Again, I mean, Ilhan Omar isn't perfect. I mean, she came out and said she supports Joe Biden or vote for him or whatever. But she is obviously one of the probably top 2 or 3 most progressive, anti-imperialist candidates, or I should say members of Congress that we have, you know, as far as I can tell. So, I mean, there are 0 policies mentioned in the why I'm running section. I mean, obviously that's pretty concerning, this Milton Meaux character. No policies mentioned and why he is running. He wants to bring unity and instead is an alternative to Omar. Okay, like, what are you offering the people? Promising only to end hyper-partisanship in Washington and work with others, presumably Republicans, to get things done. On key issues, he has serious disagreements. And again, here you can see why these corporate interests are backing him. He opposes Medicare for all. Ilhan Omar supports that. Calling only for better access to affordable health care, something like what Joe Biden or Obama would support. So just more neoliberalism that doesn't fundamentally improve the material conditions of the working people in Minnesota or otherwise. Again, why those corporate PACs are supporting him overwhelmingly. And has been critical of the Black Lives Matter movement. While Omar supported Minneapolis' decision to dismantle their police force and start from scratch, Milton Meaux has condemned the idea, presenting them as peacekeepers. I mean, Jesus Christ, how much of a, I don't know, just bootlicker for the police state do you have to be to say that they are the peacekeepers? If you have been paying attention at all to this Black Lives Matter protests and all just the brutality that the communities of color face at the hands of police. The police are not the peacekeepers. They are the outside agitators, for God's sakes. I mean, it's to characterize that is just so disingenuous. It's ridiculous. Quote, we've seen what happens when the police aren't present. Yeah, things become more peaceful and we defund them. We have a lot more money to use for programs of social uplift that actually address the root causes of crime instead of feeding our prison industrial complex, where again The United States is not the so-called land of the free when we incarcerate more people than anywhere in the world, okay? And there's been a lot more violence since then in Minneapolis, separate and apart from the civil unrest. I mean, Jesus Christ. If you're able to, I highly suggest donating to Ilhan Omar in this race because, I mean, God's sakes, we don't need any more people in Congress that don't support Medicare for all, who are against the BLM movement, and who are bootlickers for the police state. I mean, God's sakes, we have way too many of those type of people in Congress already. And then check this out. He's a union buster as well. Ilhan Omar is one of her opponents. For all his talks of ending divisiveness, Melton Meaux has certainly had a divisive career as a partner in Jackson Lewis, a law firm that specializes in union busting, as the Huffington Post noted. In at least 3 cases, he represented large corporations that were fighting lawsuits from workers who claimed they were discriminated against or had their wages stolen by their employees. So that's the type of work that Melton Meaux has done, being a union busting attorney for people trying to get their wages that were stolen by their employers and who are discriminated against. And again, doesn't support Medicare for all, doesn't support the Black Lives Matter movement, and is supported, in large part by these huge corporate PACs, particularly these pro-Israel PACs, because Ilhan Omar had the audacity to say that, the illegal settlements that the Israel government is continuing to perpetuate, and, guaranteeing actual human rights to the Palestinian people, like maybe the U.S. aid should be conditioned on that, and then that's why they're supporting this Melton Meaux person. I mean, for God's sakes. In many respects, the Minnesota primary resembles the Democratic presidential nomination, with fierce but silent struggle between more radical grassroots figures and well-sponsored moderate opponents. Residents of the 5th District will have the opportunity to choose between the candidate on August 11th and decide whether Minnesota Pete Buttigieg will get further than just the primaries. I mean, damn, dude. It's like, if you live in Minnesota's 5th District, highly encourage you to support Ilhan Omar in this race, because, again, this Melton Meaux character is just, all appearances, just really, really horrible. Again, backed by millions from pro-Israeli PACs, union-busting attorney, doesn't support Medicare for all, doesn't support BLM. What else? Yeah, why would anybody, frankly, support him over Ilhan Omar? That would be a good question to ask those people. Peace. Much love.